Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started. The days of massive armed conflicts are over. Many military pundits say this now, and with good reason. Massive military conflicts are not sustainable, you see, not in today's world. They cost a lot of money, thousands of lives are lost or at stake. But there's one more reason why massive military conflicts are passé. It's because unconventional wars have proven to be more effective. Militaries can wage wars without sending troops now. China is doing something right now, something very similar. The target is Taiwan. You must have heard about how Chinese warplanes are buzzing the Taiwanese airspace. Turns out it's all part of a larger game plan to weaken Taiwan. China is engaging in propaganda warfare. It is sanctioning Taiwan's leaders, isolating them on the world stage. China's mission is to break Taiwan psychologically before actually attacking the islands with force in a final blow. China is waging a war on Taiwan as we speak. On Gravitas tonight, we'll tell you why democracies around the world need to worry about this. Also on the show, China claims to have the world's biggest navy. But are they a serious threat? We'll tell you why the PLA is a hollow force on the high seas. Is Captain Khan on his way out in Pakistan? After losing to the military and the radicals, Imran Khan was forced to appear before the Pakistan Supreme Court today. Climate change is now sending people to hospital. Canada has declared the world's first climate change patient. And on World Science Day today, we'll tell you about the biggest challenges before science and scientists in our world. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
A virtual meeting between US President Joe Biden and Chinese leader Xi Jinping is expected to take place as early as next week. China says it is ready to sort out differences with the United States.
Many Chinese brothers sisters can learn a lot from Taiwanese brothers sisters.
Tibet's spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama, has criticized the leaders of China, saying there is too much control by the main Han ethnic group. He said he prefers to remain in India, praising it as a center of religious harmony. The Pakistan Supreme Court summoned Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan in the 2014 Peshawar Army School massacre case. Members of the terror group Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan had killed more than 150 people, mostly students.
16 national staff have been detained.
At least 16 United Nations local staff members were detained in the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa, amid reports of widespread arrests of ethnic Tigrayans. Meanwhile, in a disturbing testimony to Amnesty International, several women in Ethiopia's Amhara region described gang rape, looting, and physical assaults by Tigrayan rebels during the group's attack on the town in August. Chile's President Sebastián Piñera has been impeached by the lower house of Congress, setting up a trial in the nation's Senate over allegations that he favored the sale of a family property while in office. The vote to impeach passed with the bare minimum of 78 votes needed in the 155-member Chamber of Deputies and followed a marathon 20-hour session. Tense scenes unfolded on the streets of Bolivia as protesters and police faced off over a law against illicit profits and terrorist financing. Police were seen using water cannons and tear gas on protesters. Opposition groups joined the strike, accusing the government of using laws and the justice system to centralize power and crack down on dissent. Pregnant Yemeni journalist was killed in a car explosion in Aden in the last incident of violence in Yemen's southern port city. Initial investigations indicate an explosive device was planted on the vehicle carrying Rasha Abdullah al-Harazi and her husband, also a journalist. Officials have launched an investigation in South Africa after mysterious deaths of thousands of seals near Cape Town. Next month's AIBA Women's World Boxing Championship is set to be postponed because of a high COVID-19 caseload in host nation Turkey. Many countries have expressed reservations about traveling to Turkey, which reported over 28,000 new cases on Tuesday. Governing body AIBA does not want a depleted field because of the pandemic, and the event could be held in the first half of next year. British tennis star Emma Raducanu has appointed German Torben Beltz as her new permanent coach. The 18-year-old had been without a coach since her remarkable run to the US Open title in September. 44-year-old Beltz was coach of world number 1 Angelique Kerber when she won 2 Grand Slam titles in 2016. He has also worked with Croatian Donna Vekic.
Has China launched a war on Taiwan? It's a question we've asked before on this show. This time the answer has come from Taiwan. They say China is at war with them, a war to dent their resolve. You may have heard of the famous Chinese military strategist Sun Tzu. He said the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy, to break his resistance without fighting. And that's what China is trying to do with Taiwan. Break it psychologically before striking it militarily. The Taiwanese have a term for it. They're calling it China's grey zone warfare. Tonight on Gravitas, we'll tell you all about it, starting with the latest round of provocations. On Tuesday, the PLA conducted a patrol near the Taiwan Strait, a joint combat readiness patrol aimed at Taiwan. This is the first. All 3 branches of the Chinese military were involved. The PLA's Eastern Command was in charge of this. But guess what China is saying now? It is blaming Taiwan for these military tensions.
The Chinese People's Liberation Army are carrying out drills for the purpose of defending the state's sovereignty and territorial integrity and targeting at the separatist activities carried out by the Taiwan Independence Forces and interference by external forces. Fundamentally speaking, it is for the purpose of safeguarding the interests of the entire Chinese nation and the immediate interests of the compatriots on both sides of the Taiwan Strait. The tension of the Taiwan Strait is hard to ease if the Taiwan Independence Forces do not stop provocations.
So this is about Taiwan's resolve to stay independent. Of course, China would have a problem with that. Plus, they have the US to contend with, and that's making them jittery. You see, the Americans are stepping up support to Taiwan. Biden's statements have rattled China. And now a delegation of US lawmakers visited Taiwan. This happened on Tuesday. No names have been revealed. Neither has the itinerary been shared. The Americans came on a military plane. They stayed at the airport briefly, then left for Okinawa in Japan. Clearly, both the US and Taiwan wanted to keep this visit under wraps, but the Chinese noticed what happened and responded with a military patrol. Taiwan says this is part of a bigger design, what they call China's grey zone warfare. It's basically a campaign of unconventional warfare, a campaign designed to weaken Taiwan before an actual military offensive begins. At the center of this plan are incursions. And the idea is very simple, really. China wants to exhaust Taiwan's combat power. To do that, the PLA is repeatedly violating the Taiwanese airspace. Consider these numbers. Last month, Chinese fighters carried out 148 intrusions, 148 in a month. Do you know how many times the PLA violated Taiwan's airspace this year? about 700 times, according to one estimate, 700 incursions. What does Beijing achieve with these incursions? They allow the Chinese military to scout for vulnerabilities. They send a message to America, a signal that the jets from the PLA can reach Taiwan any time. And of course, they exhaust the Air Force of Taiwan. Every time a Chinese military plane intrudes Taiwan's airspace, Taipei loses money. It spends more on aircraft maintenance. It needs more resources to respond to new threats. Last year, Taiwan used up more than 8% of its military budget just to respond to Chinese threats. And this year, it's worse. The PLA has escalated the conflict. It has increased the number of incursions. China knows that Taiwan has limited resources. So it wants to bleed them dry. And this is just one part of the strategy. China's grey zone warfare is not a campaign that is limited to military incursions. It has three more components. Number one is cyber warfare. Taiwan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs has put out some numbers. They say cyber attacks on Taiwan have increased by 40 times since 2018, 40. They blame the Chinese for this. In 2020, Taiwan was defending itself against around 2,100 cyber attacks every day, 2,100 attacks daily. Component number two is propaganda. China is running a disinformation campaign against Taiwan. It is spreading fake news through social media. And these posts often go viral thanks to China's disinformation networks. It is believed that China has hired locals from Taiwan. Why locals? To add more authenticity to its fake news. Local Taiwanese can get more than $1,000 every month to produce social media content for China. And the third and the final component is international isolation. We already know how this works. China blocks Taiwan at the United Nations, at the World Health Organization. It has also begun sanctioning Taiwanese leaders. 3 top leaders were recently banned from entering the mainland. So military incursions, cyber warfare, propaganda campaigns, and international isolation. Short of launching a direct military conflict, Beijing is doing everything it can to take over Taiwan. This is China's strategy of grey zone warfare. But what's the end game? How will a military offensive unfold? How will China attack Taiwan if the islands are on the back foot? Experts say Xi Jinping has 3 options now. Option number 1 is to seize islands that are close to Taiwan, then launch a military offensive from there. Option number 2 is blockades, cut off Taiwan's air and sea lines, choke the flow of supplies to the Taiwanese military and the people. Option number 3 is an all-out invasion. These are the 3 options. Which one is Xi Jinping expected to choose? Some Taiwanese military experts say the Chinese president could go for option 1, seize islands close to Taiwan. In fact, they have identified a vulnerability too, the Pratas Islands. This is what they look like. These islands are controlled by Taiwan. They are vulnerable to a Chinese attack. These islands are more than 400 kilometers away from Taiwan, so defending them is going to be a challenge for Taipei. But for China, these islands are easily accessible from Hong Kong, about 320 kilometers away. Taking these islands will give China a clear advantage. Pratas Islands can serve as a base for the People's Liberation Army. They can be turned into a launching ground for future attacks on Taiwan. From here, the PLA can also keep an eye on American warships, monitor their activities in the South China Sea. And these scenarios can no more be dismissed as hypothetical. The threat to Taiwan is clear and present. The new tactics signal a shift in Beijing's approach. It wants to weaken Taiwan before it moves to take it. And this is a threat not just for Taiwan. It's a threat for all democracies. China may begin with Taiwan, but not end with it. Today it's Taiwan, tomorrow it could be anyone. With military incursions, with propaganda, with economic coercion, China is working on a model to weaken democratic states. The world will have to come together to thwart China's designs in Taiwan. And as we track these developments, here's another question. Can China really afford a full-fledged war with Taiwan, or for that matter with any other country? Can China afford to take any country in the high seas. On paper, yes. In practice, perhaps not. And I'll explain why I say this. China has the world's largest navy. It has 355 battle-ready ships. Listen to these numbers carefully. 355 battle-ready ships, including 2 aircraft carriers. China has 145 major surface combatants, 33 destroyers and cruisers, 49 frigates, 255 coastal support ships, 56 submarines, 240,000 personnel. These are some very fancy numbers. If you compare China's total naval assets with the rest of the world, here's what the chart looks like. China has a clear lead over Russia, or North Korea, of course. The United States too. Colombia, Iran, Egypt, Thailand, India, Indonesia. China is ahead of all of these countries. China's numbers look intimidating. And the scenario becomes scarier when you consider the fact that by 2030, China will have 425 battleships in force. Here's something else we need to take into account. China already has a hypersonic missile that can strike anywhere on Earth within minutes, or so it claims. China is also building its nuclear capacities. You might remember these satellite images. Well, here's another one, another satellite image. As we speak, Beijing is playing war games at home. Look at this picture. It was captured by a satellite. What you see is a dummy US warship. It has been built in a desert in Xinjiang. Why? So that Chinese troops can rehearse a combat. China looks all war ready. It has been building its navy for quite some time and preparing for a war in the South China Sea. China built reefs and islands here between 2014 and 2018. They launched more submarines, warships, vessels and auxiliaries than the total number of ships in the Indian Navy, or the German Navy, or the Spanish Navy, or the British Navy. By 2018, China held 40% of the world's shipbuilding market. In 2019, China built more ships than America did during the last 4 years of the Second World War. China did not stop building its naval infrastructure even when the pandemic struck, the Made in China pandemic. It chose to test the waters then, sent its Coast Guard ships in disputed waters, provoked the Philippines with its maritime militia. And all of this coincided with the rising tension with Taiwan. China has been breaching Taiwanese airspace. But can it afford a war on the high seas? I come back to the question. First things first, China will not be fighting Taiwan alone. Its main opponent will then be the United States. And China knows this, which is why it is building dummy American ships to practice with. China will also be fighting American allies in the South China Sea, countries like Japan and Australia. Chances are European countries may also throw their weight behind Taiwan. Now, I could draw up a chart like this one and weigh Chinese capacity against that of the US, Japan and Australia combined and deliver a verdict on the war. But it does not work that way. Forces today can no longer be measured by the size of their fleet alone. For a side to win, it must be able to deploy its combat force at the site of the conflict when needed. One of the numbers that matters is this. Aircraft carriers. The US has 11 aircraft carriers, all nuclear powered. China has 2. And their designs are dated, their range is limited. And they have a payload carrying capacity that China cannot really boast of. Here's another disadvantage. China reportedly has a 2-person ship command structure. This is the Soviet communist model. So there is a captain of the ship and there is a member of the Chinese Communist Party. Who takes the final command during an emergency situation? The Chinese structure is perfect for delaying a decision. Now, if Chinese vessels are to fight beyond the South China Sea, it could have problems there too. Most Chinese vessels do not have exposure to the waters beyond the Western Pacific. They also do not have experience or proven capability, much like the Chinese army are its troops. Way too many. But we often spot them crying. Take a look. You see, after the third Taiwan Strait incident in 1995, China adopted the policy of what can be called as 3D: dissuade, deter, and demonstrate. They're trying to deter the world by demonstrating the number. Can these numbers be taken at face value? Well, they shouldn't be. Does this mean the world can ignore China's naval buildup? Of course not. The world knows better. As we speak, ships from the US, the UK, France and Germany are sailing in the South China Sea. The US and the UK are assisting Australia in developing a nuclear-powered submarine to counter Chinese threats in the Indo-Pacific. The world's leading democracies, including India, have come together to form the Quad. Naval drills in the Indo-Pacific have gone up as China sails towards its 2049 goal to build up its navy, to strike Taiwan, to fulfill President Xi Jinping's dream of a world-class military. The world, too, is preparing to enforce the rule of law across the 7 oceans. Xi Jinping knows this. His vessels are better off anchored in safe waters. Let's shift our attention to Europe now. It says Russia is trying to destabilize it. How? By sending waves of migrants into Europe. We showed you the scenes at the Poland-Belarus border yesterday. Hundreds of migrants trying to break the fences. They want to enter Poland. The numbers are growing every day. Europe accuses Belarus of fueling this crisis, of weaponizing migrants, helping them cross the border illegally. Poland has made a big charge today. The Polish Prime Minister says Vladimir Putin orchestrated this crisis. Why would he do that? Poland is accusing Russia of trying to destabilize the European Union. German Chancellor Angela Merkel called the Russian president today. She wants Putin to act and end the standoff. The European Union, meanwhile, is gearing up to sanction Belarus again. Will Europe's latest migrant crisis snowball into an armed conflict? Here's a report.
This is the Belarus-Poland border. These migrants want to cross into Poland. They were welcomed with gunshots. Around 2,000 migrants are stuck at this border in freezing temperatures. They are running out of food, also running out of options. Some tried to force their way in. The Polish side resorted to force. Poland says it cannot take more migrants. Around 30,000 of them have already crossed illegally into Poland this year. And the crisis is only worsening. Poland says Belarus has weaponized these migrants. Reports say Belarus is now running 40 to 55 special flights per week. They are bringing thousands of migrants from West Asia to Minsk. Belarusian soldiers are helping them cross the border to enter Europe. What's in it for Belarus? Why is its president Lukashenko inflicting this pain on Europe? The migrant crisis is a retaliation after Europe slapped sanctions on Minsk. But Belarus may not be acting alone. Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki blames Russia too. He says the migrant crisis was masterminded in Moscow and by Russian President Vladimir Putin himself.
Russia's new imperial policy is progressing. We see it very clearly. We observe these steps. They are spread over various acts, they are spread over time. But it is this latest attack by Alexander Lukashenko who is the performer, but has his principle in Moscow, and this principle is President Vladimir Putin, shows the determination to implement the scenario of rebuilding the Russian Empire.
Lukashenko has come to Russia's defense. He unleashed his ire on Europe, blaming it for the mess on its borders. Lukashenko has refused to help Poland. Instead, he hurled insults at European leaders.
You imposed sanctions against me, against Belarusians. You went for a hybrid war against Belarus. Look at the media, economy, politics, and now they got hold of the security. It's a hybrid war, and you, madmen, want me to protect you from migrants, among other things. Igor, please tell me frankly if my thoughts are not logical. You have created it. Face it.
Poland has no choice but to defend its borders. It has now sent 12,000 troops to the region. The situation remains tense. The Poland-Belarus border now resembles a war front. Any mistake could trigger violence and turn this migrant crisis into an armed conflict. Whichever way this goes, at the receiving end will be these people, lured by one country, blocked by another. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Let's now talk about Afghanistan. 3 months since the Taliban's takeover, there is no semblance of governance, and to nobody's surprise. There's a lack of resources and funds, there's an unfolding humanitarian crisis, and there's a growing security threat for Central Asia. America does not want to have anything to do with this. It has moved on to work on another mess, perhaps. This one, the crisis in Afghanistan, is now for its neighbors to deal with. Afghanistan is now our problem. Some countries are trying to solve it. India, for instance, New Delhi convened a meeting of National Security Advisors today, NSAs, National Security Advisors. NSAs of Central Asian nations gathered in the Indian capital to chalk out a strategy to deal with a new reality in Afghanistan. Chairing this meet was the National Security Advisor of India, Ajit Doval. In attendance were the NSAs of 7 Central Asian nations, Iran, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan. Missing from the meeting were 2 immediate neighbors of Afghanistan, Pakistan and China. India, by the way, invited both of them despite its differences with them. Both China and Pakistan were invited. They decided to skip the meeting. China cited scheduling issues, and Pakistan did not even bother to explain. Evidently, peace in Afghanistan does not suit them. So the others met. India focused on the security challenges for Afghanistan's neighbors. Iran raised the refugee crisis and the need for an inclusive government. Kazakhstan highlighted the deteriorating economic situation. Tajikistan brought up cross-border terrorism and drug trafficking. Kyrgyzstan pointed out the resurgence of terror groups in Afghanistan. Russia, Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan called for joint efforts to restore peace in the country. Listen to some of the remarks.
We all have been keenly watching the developments in that country. These have important implications not only for the people of Afghanistan, but also for its neighbors and the region. This is the time for close consultations amongst us, greater cooperation and interaction and coordination among the regional countries.
Afghanistan is involved in terrorism, poverty and misery, unfortunately. Basically, in Afghanistan, you have just crisis, the crisis of migration and refugees. And the solution comes only through the formation of an inclusive government with the participation of all ethnic groups, and therefore we hope we would be able to determine who would be the fourth, where and who would host the fourth round, and also we would be able to come up with ideas with what mechanism we can resolve the issues in Afghanistan.
We will help the speediest restoration of long-lasting peace in that country. Multilateral meetings of the Secretaries of Security Council on the Afghan issue is important format that helps us to discuss the whole package of complex issues linked to the development in Afghanistan on the highest level. It also helps us to elaborate practical measures to counter challenges and threats emanating from the Afghan territory.
The dialogue was followed by bilaterals. The representatives of all 7 nations held individual meetings with NSA Doval. Then they jointly called on the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi. Soon after this meeting concluded, a very important statement was released. It's been called the Delhi Declaration on Afghanistan, a joint declaration by India and the 7 countries that attended. A copy of the statement is on your screen, and this is what it says. Number 1, Afghanistan's territory should not be used for sheltering, training, planning or financing any terrorist acts. Number 2, there should be cooperation against radicalization, extremism, separatism, drug trafficking in the region. Number 3, there should be an open and truly inclusive government that represents the will of the people of Afghanistan. Number 4, the United Nations has a central role to play in Afghanistan and its continued presence must be preserved. It's a very important point. The UN cannot wash its hands of Afghanistan. And number 5, ensuring that the fundamental rights of women, children and minority communities are not violated. Well, this is what the declaration says. It sounds promising, but the challenge lies in its implementation, its execution, turning these pledges into reality. That's the tough part. And for that, all stakeholders will have to build some sort of leverage over the Taliban. It's not going to be easy, not with players like Pakistan ready to throw a spanner in the works. The Taliban still consider Pakistan as their mentor and counselor. Earlier today, a Taliban delegation led by acting Foreign Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi landed in Islamabad. What for? To attend a Troika Plus dialogue hosted by Pakistan. Very interesting timing. Pakistan meeting the Taliban on the same day as India discusses peace in Afghanistan. Guess who else will be part of this Pakistani meeting? The envoys of China, Russia and the United States. The talks will begin on Thursday, and according to the Taliban's MOFA spokesperson, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, yes, they have one, these talks will focus on Afghanistan's economy, trade, transit and the refugee crisis. What does this tell you? That China and Pakistan have a coordinated policy for Afghanistan. They skipped the dialogue in New Delhi to host a parallel dialogue in Islamabad. They want to run the show. One wants clout among terror groups. The other wants minerals and geopolitical leverage. The road to peace in Afghanistan will have obstacles called Pakistan and China, make no mistake. And we are not done with Pakistan. This afternoon, something unusual happened there. The country's Prime Minister was summoned by the Supreme Court over a case that dates back 7 years. Look at these images. They're from Islamabad. This was Imran Khan's convoy as he arrived at the top court's premises accompanied by an array of ministers. It was a rare sight indeed. It's not every day that you see a sitting Prime Minister attend a court hearing. Perhaps Imran Khan viewed this as yet another opportunity for a photo op. He was all smiles as he entered the court, although he did not really have a reason to be smiling. The last time Pakistan's apex court summoned a Prime Minister, he ended up getting dismissed. We're talking about Nawaz Sharif. He was dismissed by Pakistan Supreme Court over the Panama Leaks scandal in 2018. What about Imran Khan? In his case too, a dismissal cannot be ruled out. There are several reasons. But the biggest one is the fact that this case involves a terrorist outfit. A terrorist outfit that Imran Khan has recently struck a peace deal with. The Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, the TTP, an outfit that wants to rule Pakistan under the Sharia law that made the government surrender. In 2014, this very same group killed 132 school children at the Army Public School in Peshawar. The province where this attack took place was ruled by Imran Khan's party at that time, in 2014. So the court in Pakistan wanted to know what action Imran Khan had taken against the culprits. What steps had he taken to redress the grievances of the parents? Imran Khan was asked to clarify. The Prime Minister's response was a bit baffling. He is said to have told the court, and I'm quoting from what he said, there are no holy cows in Pakistan. I believe in the rule of law. Allah will give patience to the parents of the school children. What more could the government have done apart from giving compensation? What more could the government have done? For starters, it could have avoided a peace deal with the killers of those innocent children. Imran Khan's party has chosen to legitimize the group that killed 132 children. It has signed a ceasefire agreement with them. And as if to rub salt on the wounds of the parents, Imran Khan's ministers are now trying to humanize the very same terrorist group. Ministers like Chaudhry Fawad Hussain are drawing bizarre distinctions. He's talking about the good and the bad TTP. He says there are various groups within the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. Some are ideologues, some joined under compulsions. And Pakistan wants to give them a chance. You have to listen to what he said.
We believe that there are certain groups. Obviously, TTP is not one group. They comprise of several groups. So there are ideologues. There are people who have legitimate grievances against probably us. There are people who have joined who took this course under compulsions. But all of them are Pakistanis. So the state of Pakistan wants to give its citizen a chance. If all of them or some of them or part of them wants to come back and they they express their allegiance to the Constitution of Pakistan, they undertake to respect the law of Pakistan, obviously we will give them a chance.
We'll give them a chance, he says. For the record, there are at least 81 proscribed terrorist outfits in the country. In Pakistan, 81. Together, they have around 30 to 40,000 terrorists. How many of them will Islamabad give a chance to? As it is, the peace deals with the TLP, the Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan and the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, TTP, have prompted other radical outfits to demand the same kind of relief from the government. What does this tell you? That the government under Imran Khan has set a dangerous precedent by making peace deals with radicals and terrorists. It has opened a Pandora's box. It has allowed proscribed organizations to pressurize the government to accept their demands. It has allowed them to make threats of paralyzing the country if those demands are not met. Imran Khan is a man in trouble. Every institution in Pakistan is upset with him. This includes the clergy that is letting loose religious extremists on the government. It includes the judiciary that is cornering the government for surrendering to terrorists, to extremists. It also includes the army that has decided to let the government stew in its own juices. The writing is on the wall for Imran Khan. This is how the end of a prime minister begins in Pakistan. We now turn to one of the day's most interesting headlines. A woman in Canada has been diagnosed with climate change. You heard that right. Diagnosed with climate change. She had a problem. She went to an emergency room. A doctor attended to her and then wrote climate change on the diagnosis slip. What were her symptoms? It's something that a lot of us will be able to relate to. So are you and I also suffering from climate change? Our next report tells you.
Is the rapidly changing weather making you sick? Are you struggling to breathe during extreme summers? Is your health condition getting worse because of harsh winters? Well, you could be suffering from climate change. It's a real diagnosis now, courtesy this man, Dr. Kyle Merritt. He practices at an emergency room in British Columbia. He is now making headlines for clinically diagnosing a patient with climate change. The patient is over 70 years old. She lives on a trailer somewhere in British Columbia. What are her symptoms? This woman has asthma. The record heat wave in Canada made it harder for her to breathe. The doctor knew what the problem was. It was the rising temperature. But could he cure it? Not immediately and definitely not alone. So he wrote climate change on the patient's chart. A lot of us too could be suffering from climate change. America's Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says climate change can increase our cardiovascular diseases, exacerbate respiratory disease, even lead to injuries and premature deaths. Try to think about it. The link between climate change and ill health isn't all that complicated. Take the example of floods. The stagnant water gives rise to waterborne diseases. The extreme weather event also affects our mental health. Let's take the example of a heat wave next. Extreme heat leads to heat rash, heat cramps, and it can also lead to serious problems like heat strokes. We often ignore these problems. We blame them on the weather rather than climate change. This headline-making diagnosis has now set a precedent. We can choose to mock it, criticize it, laugh it off as a first world problem, or indulge in howeaboutery. But here's something that cannot be overstated. The faster we learn to acknowledge the problem of climate change, the faster we can go about addressing it. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Here's a thought. Don't you think it is wonderful that so many of you sitting thousands of miles away from WION studios are being able to watch Gravitas live? Who would have thought that someday the world would be at our fingertips, on our mobile screens? That we would be able to video call a person from a remote island or have pizza delivered by drones, have vehicles that self-park or lights that detect motion? Who would have thought that someday we would be able to take joy rides to space? We have science to thank for all of this. It is science that has made miracles possible. Today it is the day to celebrate this subject. Today is World Science Day. The day was first observed in 2002. The idea was to honor the role of science in our lives, which means this year we are celebrating the 20th World Science Day. And that is not the only reason why this year is special. Today, science deserves the loudest applause, for it has once again made possible what was once thought to be impossible. It is courtesy science that so many of us are vaccinated against the Wuhan virus. When the virus from China started making us sick, science took up an almost impossible challenge. It worked on delivering a vaccine for a virus that the world knew nothing about. We did not know the virus's origin or its nature. For the longest time, we couldn't even figure out some of the symptoms and side effects of the Wuhan virus. But science took the challenge head on and delivered vaccines at a record speed. The world had Wuhan virus vaccines in less than a year. This is the miracle of science for you. It can help us sail through the toughest of times. When stuck in a potentially dangerous situation, science enables you to send an SOS signal through your phone. If you have a headache, you have painkillers to fall back on, courtesy science. If you have a pet at home, science allows you to keep a check on her, talk to her, even feed her from a distance. You know, when people were stuck in COVID isolation wards across the world, robots kept them company. Video calls allowed so many people to kiss goodbye to their loved ones one final time. Science outperformed itself during the pandemic. It also faced some of the biggest challenges to its credibility. Some of the loudest ones came from world leaders. Here's one of them on your screen. Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro, for example, he questioned the vaccine. He discouraged people from getting jabbed. Bolsonaro showed up unvaccinated for the United Nations General Assembly just to make his point. But the point is, science is not a matter of opinion. Science is about facts. It's about evidence. And the problem is that a lot of people are not ready to understand this very simple fact. Take the brigade of anti-vaxxers, for example. How do you talk science to them? How do you tell them that they need vaccines to survive? How do you tell them that relying on science is the only way to survive? You can't choose to not turn on the light on your life jacket when drowning in the sea. You can't choose to not take a vaccine when the world is overwhelmed by a pandemic. You see, questioning science or promoting pseudoscience is a recipe for disaster. This is a subject, this is a concept, a temperament that we must embrace if we want to make progress, to move forward. Look at how science has helped us in the last decade. We have successfully edited genes, solved mysteries of the space, be it the icy mountains of Pluto or the organic molecules on Mars or the presence of water on the planet, the red planet. In the last decade, we also redefined the unit of mass. We changed the definition of the kilogram. Even came up with a vaccine for Ebola. Despite all of this, we have failed to appreciate the beauty of science, I say. How many students do you think study pure sciences today? How many youngsters want to pursue chemistry, geology, or physics? In England, science scores among 9th graders have dropped for the first time in over 2 decades. A survey in India found that more students today are enrolling for arts in undergraduation. Science is lagging by a huge margin. Is the pursuit of science not rewarding anymore? Does a chemistry graduate need to upskill herself to get a job? Does a physics grad need an MBA for an offer letter? The biggest challenge facing science is the lack of revenue and avenues. You see, the lesser the funding, the lesser the opportunity. Scientists need money to run their labs, to continue their research, to pay their assistants and their staff. Today, science is in want of funding. University grants run out. Sometimes the industry steps in. They fund research, but that funding comes with expectation and the risk of bias. There's another problem with science. It is hard to understand most of the time. Research papers are so heavily worded, they're so jargon-filled, they barely evoke any sense of interest. It's hard to get through one. Science needs to be made more accessible if it is to generate interest in people, especially the younger generation. Do you know why? Because those attending junior school today cannot afford to lose interest in science. They will need science to solve a lot of problems in future. They will need science to combat climate change. They will need science to put food on every plate, to survive global warming. We can't let our children enter the future without holding the hand of science. So here's my message to parents tonight. It's totally fine if your child is not inclined towards science, but you must ensure that your child does not grow up to rubbish science or to embrace pseudoscience. Do you know why? Because believe it or not, it is our duty to help science thrive. Do you know what the 8th fundamental duty in the Indian Constitution says? I'm going to read it out for you. This is what it says. This is from Article 51A of the Constitution of India, and I'm quoting, "It shall be the duty of every citizen of India to develop the scientific temper, humanism, and the spirit of inquiry and reform." India is one of the very few countries in the world where the Constitution encourages a citizen to be curious, to develop a spirit of inquiry. It has been mentioned as a duty. So let's cherish this. Let's make scientific temper a way of life. After all, that's the only way we can thrive as a society. Happy World Science Day. We're wrapping the show, leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks for watching.
Great certainty for business. You're meant to be in bed, darling. It's bedtime, darling. Pop back to bed. I'll come and see you in a second. I'll come and see you in a minute, okay? Sorry, everybody. Yeah, Nanny will take you down to bed. Thanks, Nana. Well, that was a bedtime fail, wasn't it? Sorry, everyone. I thought here's a moment. I'll do a Facebook Live. We're nice and safe. Does anyone else have kids escape like 3-4 times after bedtime? Thankfully, my mum's here, so she can help out there. Okay, where were we? We are based on the health advice. Oh, it is. I'm sorry, darling. It is taking so long. Okay, I'm sorry, everyone. I'm going to just go and put Neve back to bed. Because this is well past her bedtime. But thanks for joining me. I think I've covered everything that I wanted to share at this point anyway, but maybe I'll jump online for an extended version, an extended uninterrupted version later in the week. Till then, thank you, everyone. I know everyone